Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Podcast. I'm your host, Nat, and today we have another very special guest. At Exceptional Individuals, we work with partners of all shapes and sizes, and none so fluffy and adorable as the Dogs Trust. The Dogs Trust is the UK's largest charity supporting dogs. We have Annie Swift today, maybe related to Taylor Swift, I don't know. I kind of like to keep the history alive. They are a learning and development manager. They support over 1,600 staff. Yeeks, I only support like 2. And they shape inclusive learning across diverse teams and regions. They have over 8 years of experience behind them in people-centered development. They are passionate about neurodiversity, thankfully, that's why we're here, allyship and inclusive cultures. And they have also founded the Dogs Trust Neurodiversity and Colleague Support Network, which is great. And last but certainly not least, they are a certified strategic learning and OD practitioner and workplace mediator. Look, what a mouthful. Anyway, let's bring on Annie.
Hi, Nat.
Hi, Annie.
Hello. Hi, thanks for having me.
The pleasure is honestly all ours. I've absolutely loved working with Dogs Trust. So having you on seemed like a no-brainer. It'd be great if we could hear in your own words a little bit about you, maybe your relationship to neurodiversity, and then we'll do a nice smooth transition onto some Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thanks so much for having me. And it's a pleasure working with you at Exceptional Individuals as well. And it's really exciting to be here today to talk to you about all things neurodiversity and inclusive L&D practices with regard to neurodiversity. So yes, as you mentioned, I've been working in L&D at Dogs Trust for 8 years, and I absolutely love it. I'm really passionate about supporting people to be their best selves at work and to have the resources, have the capability that they need to be able to work in a way that they feel included, that they feel appreciated, acknowledged, recognised, valued. And my role in L&D is a key part of that. So I absolutely love it. And that's what meant that I've stayed here for 8 years. And here's to the next 8, at least, hopefully. I also love dogs, of course, and as well as people. And I just really appreciate learning journeys and how we can continue to learn and embed learning practices. And with that in mind, my relationship to neurodiversity is one that is also, I'm learning and evolving and growing in that space as well. I don't identify as neurodivergent, but I appreciate a lot of the challenges. And I'm very close to people, specifically my family members, who have recently and not so recently had diagnoses. And through my supporting and understanding of their experience, that's really shaped not only personally my passion for neurodiversity and inclusivity, but also my professional view as well, and how important it is in the work.
Amazing. Thanks so much. I have to ask, what's your favourite breed of dog? Do you have a favourite, or do you love all of them?
Wow, that's a really controversial question. And the dogs, oh my goodness, it's like saying, who's your favourite child? All dogs, of course. But I do have a soft spot for super fluffy, ridiculously fluffy dogs. So Pomeranians, Spitzes, Samoyeds, because I have Samoyeds. So anything that's ridiculously fluffy and really unmanageable in terms of grooming, I'm all about that. My house is covered in fur. If only I was fluffy.
Fluffy in heart, if that's a thing. As much as I'd love to talk about dogs the whole session, let's stick it to neurodiversity. And my first question to you is that within these 8 years at Dog Trust, how has the culture influenced your approach to inclusive L&D?
Yeah, first of all, 8 years, it has really flown by. I mentioned how much I love working here and love working in L&D. So that time it doesn't feel like 8 years at all. I joined back in 2017, and when I joined, I had the sense, I had the feeling around me that this was an organisation that was committed to inclusivity. So in terms of culture, that sense that, yes, we're committed to it. I always felt that Dogs Trust cared about people as well as dogs. Dogs are, of course, important. They are our mission. And I appreciate as well, that's my perspective and the team I was in, the people I'm surrounded with. And that perspective might not be shared depending on whereabouts in an organisation you are, what you've experienced in other organisations as well. And of course, whether you are neurodivergent or neurotypical, it might shape that experience as well. So what I will say is in the last 5 years, I think I've seen a really seismic shift in what we're doing about inclusivity. So we've always said we're committed. And now I'm seeing so much more in terms of doing. So we've got an EEDI policy now. We've got a strategy now, our EEDI strategy. And we didn't have those things when I started 8 years ago. That's come in the last few years. Specifically regarding inclusive learning and development, I want to continue to build on that culture of inclusivity in the learning that we offer. So learning, training, opportunities that don't only value the unique contributions of the different individuals that attend, but that also seek to challenge biases, to break down barriers as well. So I recognise that once you start to see those barriers that you might not have been aware of before, especially if you are neurotypical in a neurotypical space, so recognising them, raising awareness of those and removing them, then through that I've started to see people's confidence grow, people feel recognised, people feel valued, they feel understood. And that's really rewarding. So the more that I can enable that in learning development, in the spaces that I operate in at work, then the better. And yeah, I'll go into more detail about what that looks like as we continue.
That's really interesting. And I have definitely seen a similar, I think, attitude where people would verbally say, we are inclusive, we are doing this, but maybe not practicing what they preach. I was wondering, was there a particular catalyst or any reason why it shifted from saying to actually doing, or was it organic?
The catalyst was 2020. It was George Floyd, it was the Black Lives Matter movement that really put a lot of emphasis on making things happen. And things were organically happening as well. They were being done. So it's not to say that things only started because of that, but it really brought EEDI. So not only in terms of race, but in terms of all the other elements as well to the forefront. And it gave us that impetus to do more for all areas. And it's been really great how much we've done, but also that there's still a lot to do as well. We don't know everything. I'm not an expert in neurodiversity. I'm trying not to feel impostery, having watched your other podcasts where you're interviewing these amazing experts. I'm not an expert in that area, so I'm doing the best that I can do with the resources that I've got, with the knowledge, the information that I can find out to make these changes in L&D. And that is a journey that's continuing. And I recognise that we don't always get it right.
I really appreciate that. And to be honest, I don't consider myself an expert. I call myself a specialist because an expert seems like a big know-it-all. I don't know it all. I'm still learning. And it just means you have an interest. And I think that interest is where I want to dive in a bit more next. For someone who works at a charity, particularly one supporting our furry friends who can't communicate as vocally as the rest of us can, it takes passion. And I think particularly working in a charity and working in learning and development, I would really like to expand a bit more. I know you said that you personally resonate with being neurodivergent, and I actually see that as a strength to this conversation because we don't want to be preaching to the choir. We want to have more advocates and allies. So my question, is there anything more that kind of sparked your interest into neuro-inclusion? Was it discussion? Was it an event? Was it a family member? Or was it something that was just on the agenda?
Yeah, two of those things mainly. Personal experiences with my family members, with my partner, who was diagnosed ADHD as an adult only last year. So that's been a real learning curve and learning so much more about ADHD in particular. And whilst there are elements of ADHD that I do resonate with in terms of distraction and focus, there are elements of ADHD that I really didn't realise were associated with it. Emotional dysregulation, rejection sensitive dysphoria. Those things and their connection, their interconnectedness with everything else. It was really eye-opening, and it really helped my understanding. The other thing as well is I have a close family member who is autistic. They were diagnosed with Asperger's at the time, so this is a longer ago diagnosis, as I understand that term is now under the autism term. And that has helped understanding challenges with family dynamics, but also the strengths and the sort of celebrations you can get from these unique interests that can be really, really interesting, and we can learn a lot about a particular area. But also the challenges, in terms of the emotions that brings, and how supporting family members and the difficulties of that, and the challenges not only faced by the family member, but everyone else, in terms of wanting to help, but not knowing what to do in those situations. So it's been really interesting, and it's really sparked a passion to be the best ally that I can be. So I find it that L&D as well really connects me to lots of different areas of the organisation. So my colleagues have been really instrumental as well in hearing directly from people across the organisation about their experiences, and that sort of shaped what I do about that in terms of me and my team, and the learning that we offer to the wider organisation across all neurodiversity.
I can definitely feel a lot of empathy, and to be honest, I would love to speak to more allies. It's similar, I would respect, as you wouldn't want just women championing women's rights. You want men and women. The same with neurodivergence. You want people who say, you know what, I might not have a direct connection, but I see the value it brings. And I think it changes the narrative from a nice to have, or is it's the right thing to do, to well, we're doing this because it makes sense. It benefits everyone. And I really like that. One, coming up with these questions, I really promised myself not to make too many connections between neurodivergence and dogs, because I thought maybe it will send the wrong message. However, I'm going to do it, and no offense, but I was thinking, and maybe I'm clutching at straws here, but the fact that dogs can't talk, you have to show a level of empathy and understanding to read what they are feeling. And I do see similarities between neurodivergence, because often our biggest challenge isn't the diagnosis, it's the communication between those who are neurotypical and those who are neurodivergent. And I wonder if you feel that has made the team with that kind of innate skill set more sensitive and adaptable to people with different needs as well as dogs.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and that very point that you've made, that has been made internally as well in our colleague network groups that you mentioned in the introduction, that if we make assumptions about what a dog is thinking or feeling, or what behaviour that they're displaying means, we might get that totally wrong, and we might force our perspective on that behaviour. And I see this all the time in terms of training, or the dog is doing this because they think that way, or they're being stubborn, or they're doing that on purpose. It is relating this human experience, anthropomorphizing the dog. And this has come up just in the Neurodiversity colleague network group this week, about how that they think I can think of myself as a dog relating to humans, and how that way that we shouldn't therefore make assumptions, and what are we trying to say, and what's trying to be communicated here, and how can we open up different channels to make that easier, or give different options to be able to communicate in the same way that we would do for dogs, and give them the space to communicate with us and not make assumptions about what that means, or what they're feeling, or what they're experiencing. So yeah, it's a really relatable parallel that lots of people at Dogs Trust certainly empathise with.
Really personally, I find that kind of illustration easy to understand, because I often explain to people how some people are top-down processes or bottom-up processes, which turns on how they see the world and what they prioritise first to get to mutual understanding. And that concept can seem a little bit foreign to people. I don't really know what it means. But if you say, okay, explain the colour blue to someone who has never seen the colour blue, you start to realise that our understanding is based on our understanding, and we can't assume that someone else is on the same wavelength. We've got to fill in the gaps. So most people can connect to animals. The more that you are around them, the more you understand their needs. And I think the same is true with neurodivergence. I can't just give you a list of this is how to communicate with us. You just have to get to know people. People are individuals, same as anything else. Now, question, I want to take all that passion, all that empathy, and see how it gets processed and put into your training materials.
Yeah.
So the question is, many training programs often have a one-size-fits-all approach. When you are developing your training resources, how do you embed that different people think in different ways?
Yeah, a great point, a great question. And I think for me, one of the biggest barriers to inclusivity in learning is having a one-size-fits-all approach. So avoiding that where we can as well. Training sessions that are just packed with information-heavy slides, or that maybe just have one way that people should engage. And that can just be really challenging. One of the things that I do and that my team will do is to offer a mix of ways to participate, whether it's verbal, whether it's written, whether it's practical. Also sharing materials in advance, allowing people to maybe opt out of certain activities or to have alternatives in place. Can just make it really more accessible. That sort of having the structure, having the outline in advance, knowing what the journey is. I think as well that there's a mindset shift here as well. So for me, I'm not thinking about just it being an accommodation, but it being inclusive. So not making adjustments as something extra to a training course, to a training package, to a learning experience, but that making sure that from the outset, from the design, that it's accessible by default. And I want to mention the colleague network groups here as well.
Please do.
Yes, these colleague network groups that I was part of the process of setting up. So I can't claim full responsibility for that. I was part of it, but I had amazing colleagues who also worked on all of the colleague networks as a project. But the Neurodiversity colleague network groups, that's an amazing space where neurodivergent individuals and allies as well. So it's welcome. You don't have to be neurodivergent to join. You can be neurotypical. The managers of people who are neurodivergent can join. It's a really, really safe and supportive space. And in that group, they share insights. And that enables me as an ally in that group to reflect on how that relates to training methods, learning initiatives, etc., based on their feedback. They actually had a meeting recently where they talked about tackling online learning and packaged all the feedback up and sent it across. And sort of think, what can I do differently? What can we take on and to improve the learning experiences here? So really open to hearing that feedback. And that helps me not make assumptions about how people are going to learn best. And I mentioned as well earlier, but just to reiterate, that we don't always get it right. Sometimes I think, we're going to do this, we're going to make sure we share all the materials in advance, and then we share it right before or 2 weeks before. And is that too early? Is that too late? So sometimes it doesn't quite work out, or we get some feedback and think we knew that, but it still didn't quite get there this time. Not being experts, although I have a neurodiverse as in neurodivergent and neurotypical team, but none of us are experts or indeed specialists in their topic. And if we do get it wrong, we do our best to learn from that, and we take that as an opportunity to know next time, and to not to think, let's pull the whole thing, let's have a knee-jerk reaction and not do it that way at all. But to think, how can we tweak that, or how can we provide an alternative there, so that in the future we've just included, whether it's just one more person, it makes a difference.
I'd love to actually ask a follow-up question regarding the network, because I've worked with a lot of organizations which have often said that a neurodiversity network has actually been one of the hardest ones to establish. The main reason being is that most groups have some sort of kind of common glue, like a shared experience, whereas neurodivergence, the very nature of it is that everyone is so different and has such contrasting views and opinions.
Yeah.
I found that, and like, for instance, some people might say this is inclusive, where it could contradict someone else's views. How do you take on these views?
Yes, and that is indeed the case. This is what happens with our evaluation. We have completely paradoxical evaluation. results sometimes based on individual experiences. And we just try and accommodate for meet in the middle.
Yeah.
And the colleague network group is the conversations that happen in that group. It's one of the most active ones. And whilst the experiences shared may be quite different, I think it's just that acceptance of being in a space where there might be certain barriers or certain experiences, whilst it doesn't happen in the same way, that the empathy and the relatability and the understanding of being perceived as different from the norm, but being in a space where being different from the norm is the norm, regardless of what that difference looks like, it really resonates well with the group. And the organisation's nurturing of that group, which is completely colleague-led. It's not dictated on, right, it's going to meet here and it's going to talk about this topic this time. It's completely colleague-led and colleague-driven. So it's grown into what it is through the people that are in it. And that, I think, makes it all the more authentic and impactful for the people that are part of that group, as well as the things that then the group will drive through the work that they do, is running webinars and panels about different experiences that they then share to the wider organisation. So raising awareness of that with people who maybe aren't in the group. So that's a really good benefit as well for the wider organisation. And that, I think, then gives the colleague network group that sort of validation and that sense of being heard, which is great.
I really resonate with your point that is colleague-led. Because while I do work with a lot of HR and they'll come up with initiatives, which I, of course, fully respect and am totally behind, there is something different between someone who may be doing it because it's right for the business and then someone doing it because there is a community, a sense of togetherness, even if that togetherness is about being on the fringes of society. I would love to explore how you take those views and opinions and how they have directly contributed to, say, training for managers. Because I know some people are also a bit worried of token gestures or not really feeling heard. So the next question is, how do you help managers feel confident supporting their neurodivergent team members day to day? Plus, how do you incorporate the group's opinions directly to the managers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am in L&D, so I will start with saying that training and awareness are obviously something that I'm going to think of, but that I'm aware that sometimes that comes across as, like you were saying, organisation-driven, tick-box exercise, and that's absolutely not my perspective of why I organise and book sessions in with yourself to upskill and educate and help support our managers with understanding neurodiversity and supporting neurodiverse teams. So we have put into practice comprehensive training sessions, awareness webinars for all staff that are external to exceptional individuals, but also through the colleague network groups, as I mentioned. So actually then being able to talk to the organisation directly and facilitating that, which is amazing. I also hosted a panel with the colleague network group on experiences with intersectionality, which was really interesting because it went across colleague network groups and across the organisation, neurodiversity being part of that. And so really taking the voice, taking sounds like I'm taking it for my own purposes in a greedy sort of way, but allowing that voice to be shared and valuing that voice is something that can then help managers. And many managers themselves are neurodivergent but still need support in supporting neurodiverse teams, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and what is right for one person isn't necessarily right for somebody else. In fact, it's probably not, because it's very unique and personal. One of the main things that comes up is confidence around having conversations. Managers want to be supportive, but they worry about getting it wrong, saying the wrong thing, putting their foot in it, not knowing exactly what prescriptive solution to give to a problem. So it's not about fixing, but about celebrating and listening asking questions, what helps you work best, being open to those adjustments. And so raising awareness with the management community that it's okay not to know all the answers. And telling myself this as well, when I feel that sense of imposterism coming in, that none of us know what the right thing to do in every given situation is with every given individual. I think as well underpinning that is what we're doing about it as an organisation, as I mentioned at the beginning, moving away from the yes, we're inclusive to this is how we are inclusive, is that as well as supporting managers with their confidence in having these conversations and raising their awareness through training, is also the fact that they are trusted and empowered through the policy, through the strategy that we have to make changes, to support their teams, to make an adjustment without it having to be an HR procedural process. So we've got a policy that outlines what they can do there, which in turn enables that culture where people feel safe, psychologically safe, to ask for the adjustments that they need as well. So going both ways, that the managers feel like they can have these conversations and that team members feel like they can ask. And the managers themselves, if they need adjustments, can ask for those. They can pay that forward for themselves. So I think when we talk about empowering managers and in supporting and empowering others, that sometimes that bit is forgotten, that they forget that this all applies to you as a manager as well, and to look after yourself and what do you need as well to be your best self.
There is a lot to unpack there. I think a really detailed answer. I really enjoy listening to that. You mentioned that managers can also be neurodivergent. Of course they can, but that doesn't automatically mean that they know how to support their neurodivergent team. And that is the point that I think sometimes gets lost on people. This kind of balance between lived experience and professional experience. And I definitely noticed a trend. Maybe, I don't know, like 10 years ago, it was all about having official experts. But then people like, nothing about me without me. You're not including me into the discussion. And then the rise of the expert by experience came up. And that concept was the idea that exceptional individuals was founded on. But as time has progressed and evolved, we realized that you need more than just personal experience. You also need the professional side. So a lot of us are getting trained up now. I've just done my master's in neuroscience, and it's just a nice combination. And this all fits in with someone who resonates with being neurodivergent and an ally. You can't have one without the other. You need to have both. And that's why I said at the very beginning, the fact that you are an ally should not be seen as a negative in order to have these conversations. Very nicely on the next question. Allyship is often seen as a nice to have. What does true active allyship look like in the context of L&D? Why do you deserve a seat at the table?
So for me,
I'd love to.
I'll try and prove myself. To do that. But for me, active allyship, it goes beyond passive support. So it's about being proactive. So seeking to understand different needs and making changes to support and to accommodate and to be accessible by default, as I mentioned earlier. So an example that I'll bring, what we've done in learning and development, is my L&D team met with various neurodiversity challenges in supporting people with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, or struggle to say that word, and went and met with them and conducted lots of research. And alongside our EEDI team, it's a small team of 2, but a team that's implementing many, many changes, we developed accessibility guidance for the training sessions that we run, presentations that could be run by anyone in the organisation, and meetings as well, which are held all the time across the organisation. And they are spaces as well where it could be very easy to only run it in a particular way that appeals to a particular personality style or preference or a neurotypical space. Having that information then was really instrumental in the learning design bit that I was talking about earlier, about the different formats and the different ways to engage and having options, but also being able to share that with everyone else in the charity, not just ring fencing that we're L&D, so we do training and we're going to make sure it's accessible in this way, but sharing that with everybody else who happens to run a webinar or do a presentation and run a meeting as well. Really trying to embed that in the way that we, as an organisation, communicate with each other. So it goes beyond learning and development, but certainly really trying to embody that and embed that in the work that we do. And I mentioned as well, but continuous learning. So recognising that actually we'll learn more, things will change, the science will tell us different things, terminology will change or be updated, and that it's okay that if we get it wrong sometimes, we recognise that and that we learn from that. And also the point that you mentioned that it might feel wrong to one person but completely right to another person. So one example is that I've learned from, another example is a session where there was a bit in that session about habits and forming habits. And one piece of feedback said that I was excluded from that because my brain doesn't work that way. I don't form habits, in that way. I'm excluded from that session. And my gut reaction was, oh God, that was not an inclusive activity. Don't do it anymore. Do something different. But then when I reflected on it and saw all the other feedback, that it was really positive and that it really actually helped and that it helped to give a structure. So I thought, don't not do something, but rather provide an alternative, or don't present something as this is the way to do something, but this is an option. And you might find this useful. You might take something or 50% away from this is useful, or 1% or 10%, but it's an option. And then trying to provide other options as well. So as well as that, the final point as well is that being an ally, I think, is sometimes that I might focus too much on overcoming barriers and thinking about challenges, and also remembering to celebrate the unique strength and allowing space for those unique strengths to come through and to be able to thrive, and really recognizing the amazing insights and perspectives that neurodivergent people can bring to the table, and making that a positive thing of celebration as well.
One of the criticisms I sometimes hear of attending, say, groups that are aimed at is that sometimes their views can overpower those with direct experience. So, for instance, your voice might be more louder, more articulate than the people who it directly affects. Do you ever consciously think how much to have an input or when to step back?
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly don't want to speak for people that, that I haven't got that experience or that sort of perspective from my own experience. So I certainly wouldn't want to take on someone else's voice or to speak for them. And equally, I'm conscious in terms of the lived experience, people in having a platform and having a voice to talk from lived experience, but not also then over relying on that, and sort of people feeling pressured to be the voice for, if somebody's got ADHD and they're doing an ADHD webinar, that then they're now speaking for everybody with ADHD, when of course it's completely unique. Or that we have people who might be really happy and confident and quite extrovert, and those people then perhaps being called on more often to speak for themselves, but also potentially in a way that maybe they're not comfortable with, but they feel a duty to do. Making sure that there's lots of different ways that people can contribute, and that I'm not making assumptions, not only about what people need in order to learn, but also what people are comfortable to talk about and comfortable to share.
That's really encouraging to hear, because the amount of time I've seen individuals saying I've been the automatic poster child. Like, for instance, oh, you're black, why don't you do the race network? Or, oh, you have autism, why don't you talk about that? For some of us, it is integral to our identity, but it doesn't mean that it has to be our sole identity. So it's really nice to hear that you don't just think, oh, you are part of the LGBT community, so of course you want to be part of the LGBT network. It's allowing people to have the freedom to choose.
Yeah, absolutely. And having the opportunity there, should they want to, then there is that channel that people can use and to reach the wider organisations. That it's not they don't have to do that.
I'm also curious to understand from your learning development role, how do you make the decision to deliver things in-house or to get externals in? Like, how does kind of balance work?
It's a case-by-case basis. And I think with neurodiversity, it's exactly what you're saying. It's lived experience and being in a position to talk about an experience versus experts' opinion, or including expert opinion. So with topics like neurodiversity and other EEDI topics, we do try to bring in external expertise as well as sharing our internal experience. Where we have internal expertise as well as potentially lived experience, depending on what the topic is, then we will try to do that in-house because it's cost effective and because we've got the resource to do it. But on subjects like EEDI and also maybe technical skills that we don't have in-house, then we'll look to bring in that external voices. So yeah, it's case by case.
You're doing really well, by the way, and these questions are tough. So
yes, they are. Thank you.
I try to give people something which they haven't found elsewhere. So naturally, dig bit deep.
Yeah.
We're almost there, though. However, we do have a few great questions before we wrap up. The next one is, what is one common misconception about neurodivergence at work that you wish more organizations would move beyond? So is there anything you've seen time and time again that either dogs trust, managers in other employments that you're like, oh, why is this still happening?
Yes, a couple of things. And we've touched on one of them right at the beginning when I said, I've been here for 8 years, and it wasn't until sort of 5 years ago that things started to really happen. And I think that's one misconception is thinking that everything has to be right and ready and perfect before you do anything. And you need to know exactly what that is going to look like, and boom, it's all done. And therefore, nothing happens. It's seen as a massive overhaul. It's seen as super expensive, a burdensome almost, or we don't have the organisational capacity to do it. When in reality, you can start now. You can start right now. Simple adjustments. Some of the things that I've mentioned, varied communication methods, clear, structured instructions. So, for example, going into a breakout room, asking you questions. Oh, what's one common misconception about neurodiversity? Go into your breakout rooms and discuss. Get into the breakout room. 99% of people, what was the question? Whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, that happens a lot. And one small change, copy the question, paste it into the announcements so that it goes into all the breakout rooms to have it written as well as verbal. Small things like that, sharing information in advance, all of these things don't take a big organisational overhaul, but they can make a difference now. So I think it's just being able to overcome that misconception that everything's got to be perfect, because it's not now. We've got an EEDI strategy and we've got an EEDI policy. It's not going to just, that's it, job done. We're going to be constantly evolving that, constantly learning and updating and adding to that, and maybe adding new elements of policies or new provisions and things as well. I mentioned as well about the moving away from the idea of fixing neurodivergent people or managing them, but instead celebrating. And I think that's a misconception, or something that happens a lot is thinking, I've got to do something about it. It's a big barrier, it's a big challenge, and forgetting to celebrate. So I always try and mention that as well, not to try and minimize or sugarcoat as well, not to go too far the other way. Oh, it's great. It must be great, but not forgetting to shine a light on those strengths that brings as well.
I think that's a really beautiful way to put it. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. So that is fantastic. Now, I'm going to end on one last question. Let's kind of hopefully bring it all together. But so far, I've genuinely enjoyed this. You're so articulate. It's a pleasure to listen to.
Thank you.
Now, if listeners are able to take one action tomorrow to build a more inclusive and neuro-affirming workplace, what would you hope it would be? And I think you answered this in your last one, but maybe if there's anything additional that you would like to add.
Yeah, I was just thinking, how can I say this in a quite a different way or not completely repeat myself? If I could take one action tomorrow to build a more inclusive and neuro-affirming workplace, what would you hope it would be? Have conversations. Let's start with conversations. Check in with your colleague about their working preferences. Offer different ways for people to contribute in the next meeting you're going to run. If you're going to ask a question, hey, let's work out some ideas to solve this problem. And you have all of the extroverts, people coming in, and the introverts are thinking, well, I haven't had a chance to contribute here, or if you're neurodivergent, thinking, I don't feel comfortable without having read this first. So, yeah, challenge yourself next time you're running a meeting or going into a meeting. And I mentioned this as well, before, but I will just reiterate it, that at Dogs Trust, we're on a journey. We really recognise that the work is not done. We're doing so much more now than we were before, but there's still a long way to go as well. We're travelling on this journey, and we're not thinking, yeah, tick that box by any stretch, but let's continue to learn from each other, to share experiences, to overcome challenges together, to empathise, to relate with each other and support each other. Whether you are neurotypical, neurodivergent, whatever your personality preferences are, that everyone has got a role in creating that culture that we talked about, where they can learn inclusively, but also be included and include others.
Oh, thank you so much, Ally, for that. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you. Well done, we've completed it.
Thank you so much for having me. And this is my very first podcast guest experience. Yay.
Well, honestly, you smashed it. Seasoned professional, it seems.
Oh, no, thank you so
very much looking forward to continue to work with you and Dogs Trust in the future. It's so great to see an organisation that's genuinely working with best practice in mind and acknowledging that there's no such thing as utopia, but it doesn't mean that we should continuously aim for it. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you so much for having me.